identity, and more. And when it comes to basketball, there may not be anyone who knows more than the Hall of Famer Bob Knight, who joins us live on the Subway Fresh Take Hotline and will join us every week at this time.
Love it.
Through the end of the NCAA tournament. It is a pleasure to have you back, Coach. How are you this morning?
Hey, it's always good to be with you two. I enjoy you through all your exploits, and I'm glad to be here this morning.
All right, before we get to all the college basketball, obviously the entire basketball world and beyond captivated by the story, the improbable story of this Jeremy Lin. I'm sure you've been following it to at least some degree. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think of the word perseverance. Here's a kid that was a good high school player, a good college player, and like every kid that plays basketball, he dreamed of being in the NBA. He got a shot at it. Things were very slow, and with his kind of educational background, there are probably all sorts of things he could be doing right now, but he persevered. And I think I think that's the greatest tribute to the kid that you could have, that he persevered. It's kind of like you two guys. How many guys would like to be sports talk guys that get to sit around and talk basketball? There are thousands of those guys, and yet you two have reached the pinnacle of sports talk because you persevered in the way probably even surprising your mothers.
Well, I would agree with that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. How about in your sport? How about college basketball? When you would get that recruit who wasn't the highest recruited kid, who got knocked around in practice some, usually didn't see a lot of minutes, and then through his years there, you start to see them rise a little bit, and at times they become stars.
Well, I think one of the great examples is away from sport. One of the great military endeavors in American history was the landing at France to culminate into the World War II, the Normandy invasion. And who was placed on the sideline as simply a decoy? General George Patton. And yet Patton persevered through all that and led his army on what was probably the greatest military march in history across France and into Germany to end the war. And we've had kids that I'll sit there and maybe practice is over and I'll say, we better take a better look at Jimmy, or we better take a better look at Tommy, or whatever it might be, because that kind of kid is always there. That kind of kid that loves to play, takes what abilities he has and works at them. And I think there are always kids around like that.
Mike and Bob Knight. And that would lead me to this question. In an era in sports where there's so much money and so much time and energy invested in scouting, I'm amazed that the Kurt Warners of the world can completely slip through the cracks when they obviously have so much talent. A guy like Tom Brady turns out to be so good when no one really thought he would be. In this day and age where high school games are on television, Coach, how is it possible that someone who obviously had this much ability can have slipped through the cracks for as long as he did?
What it might be, man, is it might be there are a lot of scouts that don't have any idea what they're doing. We were doing a game, Brent and I were doing a game last year, and there were 34 NBA scouts at this game to see a kid who to this point has absolutely no chance to play. Now, that's the opposite of what you're talking about. Here's a kid that these people have all ballyhooed, and yet I don't think he stands a chance to play in the NBA. So there's that side of it, too. I think some people get caught up with, he's big, he's quick, he's fast, whatever, and they miss guys that maybe don't have the exterior things that somebody they're looking at, the size, the physical equipment, and yet the heart, the mind is, I think, what is overlooked so many times in all sports. That's where a guy like Brady comes through. That's where a guy like Lin comes through. There's a mind and a heart, and it's very, very hard unless you're awfully good at it to determine how strong those two things are in terms of sports development. Perseverance.
Mike and Bob Knight with us as we creep towards March Madness. One of the players in college basketball who gets the most attention right now, Coach, is Anthony Davis, the shot blocker extraordinaire at Kentucky. And can you give us sort of from an X's and O's coach's perspective, when you have a guy in the middle of your defense like that, just how much easier it makes everything else, or just how many other things can spawn from the fact that you have a guy in the middle who can block shots the way that kid can?
You know, my approach would probably always be a little bit the opposite of a lot, Mike. But in a situation like that, you have to really challenge the guy. You have to get him in a position where not are you driving into him, but you're driving him. You're bringing him out a little bit. You're making him play somebody that can drive. The drive is a lot more difficult for the big kid to play when he's set up maybe 18, 20 feet from the bucket and has to play the driver than it is with the driver coming into the lane where the big guy is waiting to block the shot. I've always felt that it is important that you, from an offensive standpoint, make those guys really play defense on somebody that can drive, whether you have to get them to switch to do that or however you set it up, because a kid like that has got such great reflexes and such a good length and obviously very smart about what he does that going into him is not going to get much done. You've got to make him come out a little bit and play you.
As far as we're 26, 27 games into the regular season, conference play in a couple of weeks, from a coaching standpoint, what's the strategy with a team at this point of the season?
Well, I think it depends on what kind of a team you've got, Mike. I think that if you know that you're good enough, if you know that you're good enough to get somewhere deep into the NCAA tournament, then I think that you try to spare people. You try to not wear your guys out. You try to maybe use a couple more guys. You've worked with one of these guys that we're talking about. You've worked with a couple of kids over the course of the year, and now all of a sudden they're able to come in and play 3-5 minutes to give your first 5 or 6 kids a rest. I think being able to do that is the key to the success that any team is going to have in the NCAA. I think there has to be some depth, and many times depth has to be manufactured during the season.
Be very interesting.
Yeah.
And, Coach, we're certainly looking forward to doing this on a weekly basis from now through the end of the run in March and April. Good talking to you, Con. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, boys. Always enjoy it. Thank you.
Bob
Thanks,
Knight
Coach.
on the Subway Fresh Take Hotline. Wake up to February at Subway. Any of your favorite breakfast footlongs or $5 footlongs. I love the way he says things. Maybe it's just evidence that the scouts don't know what they're doing.
You never know what analogy he's going to use either. You never know where the comparisons are going to go.
We're landing in Normandy and all that, and that's all good. And that's a trip I'm willing to take with him once a week with pleasure. But to go back to what he was saying about Lynn, that really is, to me, the most amazing part of this. The kid obviously is good. He's obviously better than a lot of people who have been highly touted and highly acclaimed and gotten a lot more opportunities than he has. I'm always fascinated how that happens.
Well, we see it a lot and more in football. Now, it's a bigger squad in football. There's more people to actually look at than in basketball.
And in football, you're more dependent on what someone else is doing. Like how good you look may have a lot more to do with who you're playing with and against than I think it does in basketball. Basketball, you can sort of either play or you can't, and you can see that. I have more thoughts on that. We'll do that as we go. Antonio Pierce on his way in studio as well. Back in 3 minutes.